When my boss Marcus fired me for being redundant, he had no idea that every system keeping the company alive was actually mine, and the licensing agreement expired at midnight. The next morning, I woke up to 17 panicked missed calls and the sweet sound of an entire corporation realizing they'd just fired the one person who could turn their lights back on. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and I should have seen the warning signs when Marcus Williams walked into our Monday morning meeting with that smug smile plastered across his face. He'd been our new CEO for exactly 3 weeks, hired by the board after promising to modernize operations and cut unnecessary costs. What he really meant was firing people who'd built this place from the ground up. "Rebecca, stay behind," he said as everyone else filed out of the conference room. My stomach dropped. I'd been with Dataflow Solutions for 8 years, starting as a junior programmer and working my way up to senior systems developer. I knew every line of code, every database connection, every security protocol that kept this company running. But Marcus didn't care about any of that. He leaned back in his leather chair, scrolling through his phone while I waited. Finally, he looked up with those cold gray eyes. "I've been reviewing your position and honestly I don't see the value you bring anymore. We're moving everything to the cloud, outsourcing development to cheaper teams overseas. Your role is, what's the word? Redundant." The word hit me like a slap. Redundant. Me. The person who'd single-handedly rebuilt their entire infrastructure after the cyber attack 2 years ago. The person who'd saved them millions by creating automated systems that eliminated human error. The person who worked weekends and holidays to keep their servers running smoothly. "You're letting me go?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt inside. "It's just business, nothing personal," he said, already turning back to his phone. "Security will escort you out. HR has your paperwork ready." 20 minutes later, I was standing in the parking lot with a cardboard box containing my coffee mug, a small plant, and 8 years of my professional life. My coworkers watched through the windows as security walked me to my car. Some looked away in embarrassment. Others gave me sympathetic nods. Nobody spoke up. Nobody questioned it. That's how fear works in corporate America. It spreads silently, making everyone complicit through their silence. But as I drove home, something Marcus had said kept echoing in my mind. "We're moving everything to the cloud." That was interesting, considering every single system Dataflow used was built on my proprietary architecture. Every customer database, every billing system, every security protocol. I'd designed them all from scratch and retained the intellectual property rights. It was right there in my employment contract, a clause I'd insisted on after watching too many developers get screwed over by their employers. Marcus had just fired the one person who legally owned the technology keeping his company alive. And the licensing agreement for those systems? It expired in exactly 48 hours. I spent that evening on my couch, surrounded by legal documents and contract papers, while my laptop hummed quietly beside me. The intellectual property clause was crystal clear, written in language even Marcus could understand if he'd bothered to read it. Employee retains full ownership of all proprietary systems, algorithms, and code developed during employment period. Company usage rights expire quarterly and require written renewal from patent holder. Tomorrow was renewal day. And Marcus had just ensured I wouldn't be renewing anything. My phone buzzed with a text from Jenny, one of the junior developers. "Can't believe they let you go. This place is going to fall apart without you." She had no idea how right she was. Every morning when Marcus swiped his badge and walked into that building, he was entering a digital world I'd created. The employee access system that let him through the front door? The coffee machine interface he used every morning? The customer management platform that processed millions in revenue? All mine. I opened my laptop and began drafting an email to Dataflow's legal department. Professional. Courteous. Devastating. I explained that all licensing agreements for Martina's own systems would expire at midnight, and continued usage without renegotiation would constitute intellectual property theft punishable by federal law. But here's what made this beautiful. I wasn't being vindictive. I was simply following the contract that Dataflow's own lawyers had approved. Every clause, every stipulation, every protection I'd built into that agreement was now Marcus's worst nightmare. As I typed, I couldn't help but smile thinking about what would happen when their systems went dark. The customer service platform would shut down first, followed by the billing system that processed their daily revenue. Then the security protocols would fail, locking everyone out of their own building. Finally, the core database would go offline, taking with it 8 years of customer data, financial records, and operational history. Marcus thought he was cutting costs by firing me. What he'd actually done was hand me the nuclear codes to his entire operation. I scheduled the email to send at 11:59 p.m., 1 minute before the licensing expired. Then I turned off my phone, poured myself a glass of wine, and went to bed early. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day for Marcus Williams. But for me, it was going to be the start of something much better. At exactly 8:07 a.m., my phone started buzzing like an angry wasp trapped in a jar. I was sitting at my kitchen table sipping coffee and watching the chaos unfold through 17 missed calls and counting. The first voicemail made me smile. "Rebecca, it's Jenny from IT. Something's wrong with everything. The whole system is down. Marcus is running around like his hair's on fire." The second call was from Marcus himself, and his voice had lost all that cocky confidence from yesterday. "Rebecca, there seems to be some kind of technical malfunction. All our systems are offline. I need you to come in immediately and fix this." Notice how quickly redundant became "I need you." Funny how that works. By the third voicemail, panic had crept into his voice. "Look, maybe we made a mistake yesterday. Can we talk about this? Please call me back as soon as you get this." The mighty Harvard MBA was begging the woman he'd fired for being useless. I finished my breakfast slowly, savoring each bite while my phone continued its frantic dance across the table. Through my apartment window, I could see the data flow building in the distance, probably filled with confused employees staring at blank screens and error messages. Every badge swipe failing. Every computer locked out. Every coffee machine displaying "system error" in bright red letters. What Marcus didn't understand was that this wasn't some random technical glitch. This was the natural consequence of firing the architect of your entire digital infrastructure without reading the fine print. Every system failure he was experiencing right now was perfectly legal and completely justified. Around 10 a.m. I called my lawyer, Patricia Chin, who'd helped me draft the original intellectual property clause 8 years ago. "Patricia, remember that conversation we had about protecting my work? It's time to use those protections." Her laughter echoed through the phone. "Rebecca, you magnificent genius. How bad is the damage?" "Complete operational shutdown," I said, watching another missed call from Marcus light up my screen. "Banking, customer service, security, payroll, everything. They can't even order lunch without my systems." Patricia's voice turned professional. "Here's what we're going to do. I'll draft a licensing restoration proposal with new terms. Given the urgency and the breach of good faith when they terminated you, we're justified in asking for premium rates." The terms were simple but devastating. $300,000 annual licensing fee, paid quarterly in advance, plus a $50,000 emergency restoration fee for immediate system recovery. Marcus had 48 hours to accept or face potential bankruptcy as customers fled to competitors who could actually access their own data. My phone rang again. This time I answered. "Rebecca, thank God." Marcus's voice cracked through the speaker, desperation bleeding through every word. "We need to fix this immediately. Our biggest client just called threatening to cancel their contract because they can't access their account information." I leaned back in my chair, admiring how the tables had turned in less than 24 hours. "I'm sorry, Marcus, but I'm no longer an employee of Dataflow Solutions. As of yesterday, you made it clear my services were redundant." "That was a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "We want you back. Full reinstatement, raise whatever you want." "I'm afraid it's not that simple anymore," I replied calmly. "You're currently using proprietary technology without a valid license. That's intellectual property theft, punishable by federal law. However, I'm willing to discuss new licensing terms." The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Finally, he spoke. "What kind of terms?" "My lawyer is sending over a proposal. You have 48 hours to decide. After that, the licensing fee doubles and I start fielding calls from your competitors who'd love to acquire systems that actually work." "This is insane," Marcus exploded. "You can't hold an entire company hostage because you're upset about being fired." His true colors were showing now. No apology for the humiliation. No acknowledgement of my 8 years of dedication. Just anger that his victim had dared to fight back. "I'm not holding anyone hostage," I said evenly. "I'm simply protecting intellectual property that legally belongs to me. The same property you dismissed as redundant yesterday. The board will never approve those numbers, he said. Then I guess you'll need to explain to the board how you fired the person who owns the technology keeping your company alive, without bothering to read her employment contract first. Another long pause. I could practically hear his Harvard MBA brain trying to calculate a way out of this mess. But there wasn't one. He'd walked into this trap with his eyes wide open, blinded by his own arrogance. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. I'll present it to the board. Marcus, I said before hanging up, next time you want to modernize operations, maybe start by learning what those operations actually are. 3 hours later, Patricia called with an update. The board just held an emergency meeting. They voted unanimously to accept your terms effective immediately. But here's the interesting part. They also voted to place Marcus on administrative review for failure to exercise due diligence in personnel decisions. That afternoon, I received a formal apology letter from Dataflow's board of directors, along with a check for the emergency restoration fee. The letter was signed by Robert Davies, the board chairman, and included a line that made me laugh out loud. We deeply regret the oversight that led to this situation and look forward to a continued partnership with your consulting firm. My consulting firm. I liked the sound of that. But the real vindication came from an unexpected source. Jenny texted me around 4 p.m. Rebecca, you're a legend. Marcus just sent out a company-wide email calling you an essential external partner and apologizing for the administrative error in your departure. Half the office is laughing, the other half is updating their resumes. Essential external partner. Yesterday I was redundant. Today I was essential. The only thing that had shifted was Marcus's understanding of who actually ran this place. That evening I sat in my home office, designing the framework for Martinez Technology Solutions, my new consulting company. My first client would be Dataflow, paying premium rates for services they used to get at employee wages. My second client was already reaching out, a competitor who'd heard about Dataflow's system issues and wanted to ensure they never faced similar vulnerabilities. Marcus had tried to cut costs by firing me. Instead, he'd created my most successful business venture and destroyed his own career in the process. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's succeeding so spectacularly that your former boss has to watch you thrive while his world crumbles. Walking back into Dataflow Solutions 3 days later felt like entering a completely different universe, one where I held all the power cards instead of begging for scraps of respect. The same security guard who'd escorted me out with my cardboard box now nodded respectfully and said, "Welcome back, Ms. Martinez. They're expecting you in the executive conference room." Executive conference room. Not the cramped IT closet where Marcus used to summon me for his condescending lectures about efficiency. The marble-floored sanctuary where real decisions got made by people who actually understood business. Robert Davies, the board chairman, stood up the moment I entered, extending his hand with the kind of warmth reserved for valued partners, not disposable employees. "Rebecca, we cannot apologize enough for what happened." Marcus acted without board consultation and frankly without basic common sense. Around the mahogany table sat 5 other board members, all looking genuinely embarrassed by the circus their CEO had created. But Marcus himself was notably absent, and when I asked about it, Robert's expression darkened. "Marcus is taking some time to reassess his leadership approach," Robert said diplomatically. "We've discovered this wasn't his first questionable termination decision. Apparently, he fired 3 other long-term employees last month without reviewing their contracts or consulting department heads." The pieces started falling into place. Marcus hadn't just been targeting me, he'd been systematically destroying institutional knowledge and experienced talent, probably to justify bringing in his own people at lower salaries. Classic corporate psychopath behavior. Destabilize, then rebuild in your own image. "We'd like to offer you a position as Chief Technology Officer," Robert continued, "with full authority over all systems operations and a seat on this board. Your annual salary would be $180,000, plus the consulting fees we're already paying for your systems." Chief Technology Officer. I'd gone from redundant to C-suite in 72 hours, with a salary nearly double what I'd been making as a senior developer. But the real satisfaction wasn't the money or the title. It was the acknowledgement that my work had value, that my knowledge mattered, that firing me had been a catastrophic mistake. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, but I need to think about whether returning full-time is the right move for me. Robert nodded. Of course. Take all the time you need. In the meantime, we'd like you to help us implement some changes to prevent this situation from happening again. Over the next 2 hours, we discussed a complete overhaul of Dataflow's employment and intellectual property policies. New protections for employee-created innovations. Mandatory contract reviews before any termination. Board oversight for all senior staff decisions. Anonymous reporting systems for leadership misconduct. But the conversation that mattered most happened during a coffee break, when Jenny approached me in the hallway. Her eyes were bright with something I hadn't seen before. Hope. Rebecca, what you did, it's given everyone courage to speak up. 3 people filed complaints about Marcus with HR yesterday. Sarah from accounting finally reported how he made inappropriate comments about her appearance. Tom from sales documented all the times Marcus took credit for his client relationships. The ripple effect was bigger than I'd imagined. My refusal to disappear quietly had opened floodgates for other people who'd been suffering in silence. Marcus's reign of terror was crumbling not because of my system's shutdown, but because people suddenly realized they didn't have to accept his abuse. That afternoon I got a call from Patricia with news that made my day even better. Rebecca, Marcus just hired a lawyer. Apparently he's threatening to sue Dataflow for wrongful termination, claiming the board fired him without cause. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. He's suing them for wrongful termination? After he fired me without reading my contract. Gets better, Patricia continued. His lawyer clearly didn't do proper research either. Dataflow has documentation showing Marcus violated company policy by terminating employees without board approval. Plus, there's now a paper trail of harassment complaints from multiple staff members. The man who'd destroyed other people's careers with reckless abandon was about to learn that actions have consequences. His lawsuit would fail spectacularly, and every detail of his misconduct would become public record during discovery. But the moment that truly validated everything happened near the end of the day. I was gathering my things when Marcus himself appeared in the lobby, probably there to collect his personal items. He saw me and froze, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and finally something that looked like fear. Rebecca, he said, approaching cautiously. I want you to know that letting you go wasn't personal. It was just business. I looked at him for a long moment, this man who'd tried to erase 8 years of my professional life with a casual wave of his hand. You're right, Marcus. It wasn't personal then and it's not personal now. It's just business. Good luck with your lawsuit. He opened his mouth to respond, but I was already walking toward the exit, leaving him standing alone in the lobby of the company he'd tried so hard to control. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemy. It's succeeding so completely that they become irrelevant to your story. 6 months later, I was standing in front of Dataflow's entire staff, presenting the new innovation protection program that would ensure no employee's contributions could ever be dismissed or stolen again. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman Marcus had called redundant was now reshaping the company's entire approach to talent and intellectual property. The Rebecca Martinez Innovation Protection Act. Robert Davies had called it during the board meeting, and despite my protests about the name, it stuck. Every new hire would receive training about IP rights. Every termination would require board review. Every employee's contributions would be formally documented and credited. But the real transformation went deeper than policies and procedures. The culture of fear that Marcus had cultivated was being replaced by something healthier. Open communication, mutual respect, collaborative problem-solving. People who'd been silent for months were suddenly contributing ideas, speaking up in meetings, taking ownership of their work. The presentation went well, but the moment that mattered most came afterward, when a young developer named Kevin approached me. He reminded me of myself 8 years ago, brilliant, hardworking, but uncertain about his place in the corporate hierarchy. Ms. Martinez, he said nervously, I wanted to thank you. What you did showed all of us that our work matters, that we don't have to accept being treated like we're disposable. That's when it hit me. This story was never really about revenge or even justice. It was about dignity. About refusing to let someone else define your worth. About standing up not just for yourself but for everyone who comes after you. A week later, I received an unexpected package at my new office. Inside was a handwritten letter from Marcus, postmarked from another state. The lawsuit had indeed failed spectacularly, and apparently he'd relocated to explore new opportunities. Rebecca, the letter began, I've had time to reflect on my mistakes at Dataflow. You were right. I never understood what you brought to the company and I let my ego override good judgment. I hope you can forgive my arrogance. It was probably the closest thing to a genuine apology I'd ever get from him. But forgiveness wasn't really the point anymore. I'd moved beyond needing his acknowledgement or regret. His opinion of me, positive or negative, was simply irrelevant to my success. The letter continued, I've learned that leadership isn't about control or cost-cutting. It's about recognizing and protecting talent. I failed at that completely. I folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder of how quickly power dynamics can shift when you know your own value and refuse to compromise on it. 3 months later, Martinez Technology Solutions had grown to 12 employees and was consulting for companies across 3 states. We specialized in exactly what I'd done at Dataflow, building robust systems and protecting the intellectual property rights of the people who created them. My favorite client was a small startup run by 3 women who'd been burned by previous employers taking credit for their innovations. Helping them structure contracts that protected their work felt like completing a circle that started with my own 8-year journey at Dataflow. The best part wasn't the financial success or professional recognition. It was the message I'd received from Kevin just last week. Ms. Martinez, I used the negotiation tactics you taught me to get a 40% raise and formal credit for the security system I developed. Thank you for showing me that knowing your worth isn't arrogant, it's essential. That's the real victory. Not just winning my own battle but changing the battlefield for everyone who comes after. Marcus thought firing me would save money and eliminate resistance to his authority. Instead, he created a movement of people who refused to accept being undervalued or overlooked. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even with your enemies. It's building something so successful that their opinions become completely irrelevant, while ensuring that other people never have to fight the same battles you did. And that's exactly what we did.